Please welcome U.S. Senator Sherrod Brown.
What? Stop.
Thank you. Thanks. Thank you. Marty, this is some crowd today, isn't it? Whoa. Thank you. And it's so moving, and thank you. And thanks for this energy that you bring. Mr. Chairman, thank you. Representative Brent, thank you. I love this team running the county party. Best county party. I think that partly because I live here, but partly because I know you too, the best county party in the state that's going to produce the biggest margins for me, for the three Supreme Court candidates. So thank you for that very much. First thing I want to do is, and Chantel, thank you. And I'm going to get to Marcia in a second. But thank you to the wait staff for your work. If you talk about the dignity where you talk about people that serve, that are never paid enough. I told a story in the other room to some people. I was at an AFL-CIO dinner maybe 10 years ago in Cincinnati, and a crowd probably half this size. It was the county AFL, and there was a round table near the front. And there were several middle-aged women sitting at that table, and there was an empty seat. I sat down and said, "What brings you here?" And they said, "Well, we negotiated our first union contract today." I said, "Yeah?" I said, "What does that mean?" She said, "I negotiated on behalf of 1,200. We negotiated on behalf of 1,200 custodial workers with the downtown Cincinnati business owners." And I said, "And tell me about the contract." And this woman looks at me. She said, "I'm 51 years old. This is the first time in my life I'll have a paid 1-week vacation." And you think of what the labor movement means. My wife, Connie, who's sorry she couldn't be here tonight, her dad was a utility worker in Ashtabula County. And she had an asthma attack at the age of 16, the oldest of 4 kids. She had an ambulance take her to the Cleveland Clinic. She was there on and off for much of the next 2 years. Without her dad's union card, she said she would have died because he had health care. She had health care because of her dad's union card. So just always, when we talk about infrastructure in that introduction, big part of that is we made sure there's a project labor agreement. That's what Democrats do. That's what pro-labor people do, is to make sure there's project labor agreement. So you understand that. Marcia Fudge, it was wonderful to see Marcia and her mother here. And Marcia is getting to spend a little more time with her mom now. And when I talk to Marcia, I can just see the love she has for her mother. And it's just a pleasure to watch. And they've had a lot of years together, and we'll have many more. But I know way more about Marcia on her professional side. But when I took over that committee in 2021, it was always called the Banking Committee. When Marcia soon after was sworn in as Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, essentially the name of our committee changed from just banking to banking, housing, and urban affairs. And a big part of that was because Marcia put the kind of emphasis on housing. One of the things she's working on the most, we all know the wealth gap in this country. The wealth gap that's about race, the wealth gap that's about gender, the wealth gap that's about neighborhood. And Marcia, more than any secretary ever, is focused on how we get young people able to buy a home and build that kind of generational, transgenerational wealth. She made bigger strides on that issue. We'll never have done enough, but she made bigger strides on the issue than any secretary of HUD ever before her. So, Madam Secretary, thank you. Plus, Chantel, she was my congresswoman, and as you're now my congresswoman, so thank you. I want to start off with a story that really has nothing to do with this, but it kind of does. I went to a new dentist in Cleveland, 3 miles from my house last year, and you go to a new doctor, a new dentist, you got to fill all these papers out, and so I walk in, and there's a woman sitting there, and she said, "What's your name?" And I said, "Sherrod Brown," and she said, "Spell it." And I said, Sherrod Brown. And she said, "Where do you live?" And I gave her our address in the city of Cleveland. And she said, "Where do you work?" And I said, "I work for the federal government." And she said, "What do you do?" And I said, I'm a United States congressman. And she looked up and she said, "Is that full time?" Then I tell that story because it's funny, it's true, but it's funny also tell it because it teaches, Marcus Aurelius once said that humility is the foundation of all virtue, and where Marcia and I work, and now Chantel works, humility is not always in great supply. But I also tell it because she really does. I don't know her story. I saw where she was working, but I do know that people like her often don't think government has any role in their lives, that government can make their lives better. You know, they're not, she probably isn't an activist like you, that she would pay money to come to a dinner like this and spend an evening not being able to see the Guardians beat the Yankees in 10 innings with 3 runs the bottom of the 10th. But but I think a lot about her, that our job in part is to make sure that people like that recognize that government be a good force in their lives. And that's why I'm hopeful. I'm hopeful about Biden winning re-election. I'm hopeful, Chantel, about you and your colleagues taking the Congress. I'm hopeful about keeping the Senate. I'm hopeful about that because I travel this state and see what people are thinking and how people are. And I'm hopeful because I saw what you all did last year in the November election when 48 points we won by. Think about that, 48 points. Nobody thought we were going to win by that margin. So I want to ask you, how many people in this room, if I'm going to ask you to stand up and stay standing, how many people in this room circulated petitions for abortion rights last year? Stand up if you circulated petitions and stay up. Okay, how many of you even gave $5 or $10 to that effort? Stand up. How many of you made phone calls or knocked on doors for issue 1? Stand up. Okay, how many of you voted for issue 1? Stand up. Come on. So, all right, you sit down now. But that's what gives me hope. What also gives me hope is since Marcia became Secretary of HUD, since we got to the majority in the Senate, in 4 short years, we've confirmed 170 new judges. And 60% of them are women, and 60% of them are people of color. That has never happened in this country, that we finally did that. And I'm hopeful, too, because I want to tell you a story about something that happened right after Chantel came to the House. And we passed something called the child tax credit. I was sitting on the floor of the Senate on the day, it was March, Chantel came a little later than that, but it was March of 2021. And I'd been working on the child tax credit for 10 years. And we passed the extension of the child tax credit by 1 vote. Every Democrat voted yes, every Republican voted no. The Vice President Harris came in and broke the tie 51-50. So what did that mean? We passed it in March, the President signed it in April. I spoke to Secretary Yellen, one of Marcia's cabinet colleagues, and she got up and running the child tax credit. So in July, checks went out to the parents of 2 million children in Ohio. Checks went out to hundreds of thousands of families of children in Cuyahoga County. Checks went out to the families of 60 million children in the United States. You know what happened? That was in July. By September, the child poverty rate in this country had dropped by 40%. Think about that, by 40%. That's because we recognize that if the planets align, we win the House, we win the Senate, we win the White House, we get things done. Let me give you another example. That same day, we passed an extension, we passed a bill to save the pensions of 100,000 union workers in this state, Teamsters and iron workers and others, 100,000. I was talking to I was a meeting in Worcester, just south of here, just near Akron and Canton, and a Teamster stood up and he said, thank you for, with kind of a shaky voice, thank you for saving my pension. And then his wife stood up and she said, my husband was an over-the-road truck driver for most of 30 years. He missed my daughter's soccer practices and soccer games. He missed my son's play practices because he was providing for us, and he knew that he was putting this, because he understood, many people, not many in this room, don't understand what collective bargaining is. You sit at the table, you give up something at the bargaining table, you get a defined guaranteed pension 10, 20, 30 years down the road. That's what it should be. Wall Street squandered these pensions. 100,000 union members in Ohio were going to lose 30, 40, 50% of their pension. So this woman stood up and she said, Senator, when you did that, my husband first got the letter from Central States 3 years ago, and she said he just changed. His anxiety, He was irritable, he was grumpy, he was anxious, he thought he hadn't provided for us. But when you got that pension fixed, he returned to what he used to be, the same kind of decent man he was. And that's what this is about. This isn't about statistics. This is about individual people making a difference. Let me give you one more example. How many people are veterans in this crowd? Put your hand up if you're a veteran. Okay. Thank you. Some of you are old enough to remember Agent Orange in Vietnam. Soldiers and Marines came back from Vietnam. They'd been exposed to this herbicide, Agent Orange. They began to develop all kinds of cancers when they got back. The government lied to them. The chemical companies lied to them. They had to fight their own government, their own Veterans Administration, to get care from the VA, from the illness they got because they fought for us. Well, this time, we know, I met a woman from Sandusky whose son-in-law lives in Columbus, and you've probably seen that family's ad on TV, our ad on TV about him. But she came to me. There were thousands of veterans that returned from Iraq and Afghanistan exposed to those football field-sized burn pits. And they came back in a year or 2 years. This gentleman, Heath Robinson, the Bill's named after him, he came back to Columbus. He was a distance runner for 2 or 3 years. Then he got this awful cancer, and he died within a couple of years. And so what we did, we wrote this bill. We listed 23 illnesses. Doctors told us about this, 23 illnesses that could come about because of exposure to this, to those burn pits and the chemicals in those burn pits. And if someone shows up, and so we listed this in the bill, somebody today shows up with one of those illnesses, they get immediate care from the Veterans Administration. And as Chantel knows, we thought we were about to pass that bill, and then Republicans said it cost too much, and they were going to fight it. And then we argued, wait, it never costs too much to send people to war. It only costs too much when you bring them home and try to take care of them. So we won that argument, right, Chantel? So those are the kinds of things that we show the public what we've done. And we will also, you don't win campaigns just by saying, look what we did. You win campaigns by saying, here's what we're going to do. And that's our mission in the next 8 months. I'm going to run ads for 8 months of our accomplishments. $35 insulin, biggest investment in climate change ever. Gun safety legislation we passed. Civil rights legislation we passed. Pensions, child tax credit, all these things we've done, but we've got to also talk about the future. And that's what you're going to see from Chantel, and you're going to see from me, and you're going to see from Donnelly and Stewart and Forbes in the next few months. So I want to close with a couple of things. Every year, I'm going to do it next week. Every year I invite 6 of my colleagues, 3 Republicans and 3 Democrats, to join me in the Senate floor to read the letter from the Birmingham jail. I've done this several years. And we divide the letter into 7 parts, and each of us reads a part of it. And you may remember Dr. King wrote this letter to the moderate ministers in Birmingham in 1963 when they were saying, be patient, we're going to get voting rights, just be patient. He could no longer be patient. He wrote this beautiful letter. And most of you read this letter in high school, I assume, letter from Birmingham jail, and unless you went to high school in Florida, then you probably didn't, but if you've gone to high school anywhere else. But when we read this letter, I always save one part of the letter for me to read on the floor, where he says, human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. Human progress never rolls in on wheels of inevitability. And you could be somewhere else tonight. You could be doing a lot of other things. You could spend your money on something else. But your activism is why we're going to win. Your activism is why we've had good labor law over the years. Your activism is why this Congress passed civil rights 6 years ago. Your activism is what fixed the pensions and invested in climate change. And that's why we need you so much. So I ask you to do a number of things. I ask you to go online to sherrodbrown.com and sign up and help us. I ask you to work with Chair Brock and Vice Chair Brent and sign up and help get out the vote here. And don't forget the 3 judges all the way down the ticket. All the local judges and the Supreme Court near the bottom of the ticket. I ask you to step up. You all have Trump voters, you know. You have Trump voters sometimes at work. And maybe some of you have family members, I'm sorry if you do, that are Trump voters. Probably some. You may have somebody at church. You may have somebody in your neighborhood that's a Trump voter. It's frustrating as hell to try to change your mind. So do this. If a Trump voter comes up to you and talks to you about this, go find 2 new young people that aren't voting and make them your project. So every time a Trump voter comes to you, you find 2 people, because every one of you at your church, in your neighborhood, in City Hall, Mayor, everybody's those people that aren't voting. And Brock's and Brent's biggest issue this year is getting people to vote and making sure they vote all the way down the ticket. And that's what's so important, and that's what we're counting on you to do. So when you think about Dr. King's words about human progress rolling in the wheels of inevitability, it's up to you to make that happen. And when you think about the accomplishments we've had in the last 4 years, in what we can do in the next 4 years, and those accomplishments will happen because of your activism. Those accomplishments will happen because you step up. And we do this, we win the House. I'm counting on you to win the House, Chantel. Got to pick up some seats. We're going to hold the Senate because I'm going to win. My colleagues are going to win. Biden. President of the United States is going to be reelected. So we're going to win the trifecta. We're going to win the Senate. We're going to win the House. We're going to win the White House. And those accomplishments for the last 4 years, you ain't seen nothing yet.